Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bi fadlika 'ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. Um, so it says Babu Sayd al-Kalbi al-Mu'allami. So it's catch the catch of a trained hunting dog. So what does this whole concept represent? It represents the concept of al-haja and darura. So haja is difficulty, right? Widespread difficulty. So there is no necessity. It is not daruri. It is not essential that Allah allow us to hunt with dogs, because um, Islam came in a stage in the history of mankind where farming is well established, right? Farming has been around for how long? What, 10,000 years or something like that? And so um, Islam came and there are rituals uh, that deal with domesticated animals, right? We have sheep, we have goats, we have camels, we have cows, etc. So, you know, there's all these things that we do with these animals. And on Hajj, the default is you don't bring wild animals as an offering. You don't do that, do you? You bring domesticated megafauna, meaning large chunks of meat, right? Large chunks of meat exist and they are domesticable. You can control them, so you don't have to go and hunt them, right? So in principle, if Islam came along and said, you can only eat domesticated animals, it's not the end of the world. You're not going to die, right? So it's not an issue of life or death, okay? But it is a hardship, and it's a hardship that applies to me, you, and other people. So if the only source of protein could be from domesticated animals, animals that you could get hold of and grab hold of them physically and put them in a position and slaughter them properly, then it would be a difficulty and it would be widespread and be recurrent. So for which reason we see here that here al-haja tanzilat manzilat al-darura. We see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has treated this issue of difficulty and widespread, because it's so widespread, has treated it as if it were duress, as if it was a life or death situation, and allowed you to kind of eat something that is in principle najas, right? And basically bent the rules of slaughter, right? The rules of slaughter have been bent here. So we have two types of slaughter. We have normal slaughter, which is here is an animal, you have control of the animal, cut its neck, cut its throat in this kind of way. Make sure you do that. If you don't do it, it's not just, you can't eat it. And then you have another form, which is an animal that you can't control, a wild animal, right? In which case you can do things like shoot it with conditions. You can do things like use a bird of prey, like a falcon, to go and kill a pigeon for you, right? You can use a trained dog, okay? So principle number one here is a difficulty could be treated as duress, okay? And here's a case of it. Principle number two, duress shall only be recognized in its actual extent. Okay, so yes, the dispensation is there. The door has been opened for us. There's ease for us, and that you can go hunting. You can now access protein in another way, right? Even if it's not even necessary, given that it's just generally difficult. However, there's conditions, right? Number one is that you have to have a trained dog. So it's not just anything. It's not like this. Oh, it's difficult to only eat domesticated animals. Therefore, any way that any other animal dies is fine. It's not like that. So many Muslims, they function like that. They will see a difficulty in the deen. And so then that without any limits, everything becomes halal. Right? Everything becomes halal. When in Rome, do as the Romans, right? Just everything. So they don't have a system. So a key moral and system that we have to have in our lives, and we see this here in fiqh and see this in hadith, is that yes, difficulty will result in ease, but ease within limits. So there's conditions. You can't just use any animal. You have to use a trained animal. Why? Because a trained animal the harm of eating unslaughtered meat will be less. Here's an animal. He'll go and get the duck, bring it back. He doesn't eat it. It's not half-eaten duck, right? He'll go and get the rabbit and bring it back, right? It's controlled, right? There's an element that you can't control. Obviously, he's going to bite the rabbit, of course, right? But he's going to kill the rabbit, bring it back to you. That's how he's going to do it. He's trained, so it's not random. Okay, so that's principle number 2. Duress, right? And anything that's treated as duress shall be recognized only in its actual extent, right? Oh, I'm in the West now, and look, there's a war with Iran. Take my hijab off. That doesn't make any sense, right? What are you talking about, right? Like what is your system? Right. So yes, sister or brother, it could well be that there's something could change the Sharia for you, but it only happens in this actual extent, right? When you eat, for example, haram food, right? Because you're dying, you can only eat the amount of haram food that you actually need to eat, because Allah has said stay alive, and so you're only allowed to eat enough food to stay alive. You can't eat more than that, right? If you have to take an interest loan because you have your son has an operation tomorrow morning, and there's no way of paying it anywhere else, and no one's going to lend it to you, and you need $10,000, you cannot borrow $11,000. You can only take the minimum you have to, right? If you're forced to have insurance, then you have to have uh, just third-party insurance, just covering, you know, anything that would be needed to fix someone else's car. But if they're not forcing you by law to have full coverage, you cannot have full coverage, because now you've gone into the haram more than you actually have to, right? You're having an operation, and they're going to expose your thigh. Okay, do they have to expose your stomach as well? Yes. Why? Just say, please, I'm going to go into operation. Please cover this. Please cover this. Whatever area you need to see, you can expose. Do not expose any more than that, right? And so this is a way of living life, right? I had to expose my kids to something that wasn't good, right? For a necessity. But when that necessity stops, I'm not going to expose it to them anymore, right? That's a way of living life. So here it says, أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا نافع أن عبد الله بن عمر كان يقول في الكلب المعلم: كل ما أمسك عليك وإن قتل أو لم يقتل. Right, so Malik informed us from Nafi' from Abdullah ibn Umar. So again, Imam Malik is bringing his strongest weapon, which is the fatwa of Abdullah ibn Umar, as narrated by Nafi'. He said, containing trained hunting dogs, not just any dogs. Eat whatever it catches for you, whether it kills it or not. So the question is, Ya Allah, when you tell me I can use a dog to hunting, does that mean you can go and get the rabbit and bring it to me and then I can slaughter it? Or do you mean even if the dog kills it? So Ibn Umar is saying, yeah, even if the dog kills it, it's fine. Right? It's not that it just has to get hold of it. قال محمد: بهذا نأخذ كل ما قتل أو لم يقتل إذا ذكيته ما لم يأكل منه، فإن أكل فلا تأكل فإنما أمسكه على نفسه. وكذلك بلغنا عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنه، وهو قول أبي حنيفة والعامة من فقهائنا رحمهم الله. So Imam Muhammad, he says, we adhere to this: whatever is killed by it, by the hunting animal, whatever survives and then you slaughter it, as long as it has not eaten from it. So the dog goes and grabs the hair and kills it and brings it to you, or the dog grabs it, brings it to you, and it's still alive, and you slaughter it Islamically. That's fine, as long as the dog does not eat from it. If it eats from it, then do not eat it, because it only caught for itself. Okay, it did not catch for you, because it is you, right? And that was the discussion last week about machine slaughtered, right? So the dog is you because you sent the dog and it followed these certain rules, right? or was the dog working with it within its own agency? So the same thing, you turn the machine on, you turn the conveyor belt on. Is it working for itself or is it working for you? The issue of agency, who's doing it? That was that question we were discussing last week. Similarly, it has reached us from Ibn Abbas, and it is the translation should be, thus has it reached us for Ibn Abbas, not similarly, right? So, i.e., that's what we've heard from Ibn Abbas. And it is the verdict of Abu Hanifa and our fuqaha, i.e., the Kufans, may Allah have mercy on them in general. Okay? So, here's a dog, it's trained that it goes and gets it and brings it back and does not eat from it. So, the same thing you can do a falcon. They used to use cheetahs, right? So, cheetahs can be trained, etc. Any animal that could be trained, if you train it, it could do that. I'm trying to think of anything else. Cheetahs, hounds, um, um, birds of prey. Certain birds of prey will do that. Falcons will do that. Um, I'm not sure what else practical things could be done, but yeah. Okay, so now we're on to aqiqah. Okay, so it says باب العقيقة. says أخبرنا مالك حدثنا زيد بن أسلم عن رجل من بني ضمرة عن أبيه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم سئل عن العقيقة قال لا أحب العقوق فكأنما إنما كره الاسم وقال من ولد له ولد فأحب not أحب فأحب أن ينسك عن ولده فليفعل, right? So Imam Malik narrates from Zayd ibn Aslam. So frequently Imam Malik will narrate from Zayd ibn Aslam from the Prophet ﷺ directly. So who is Zayd ibn Aslam? Zayd ibn Aslam is of the descent. He's from the family, basically extended family of Sayyidina Abu Bakr through 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 clientship, through being a freed slave. So he is not a Sahabi, Zayd ibn Aslam. He's a huge faqih and an amazing person, but he is a huge hadith narrator, but he's not a Sahabi, right? So when we're looking for our chain of transmission, we want it to be connected. This says Malik from so and so, etc. So Malik narrates from Zayd ibn Aslam. Okay, well, if he wasn't a Sahabi and he never heard the Prophet, he never saw the Prophet, heard the Prophet, then who is he narrating from? He says, narrated to us from a man of Bani Damra. So, key concept. If you know, we are assuming the worst, right? Because those of you following me on Instagram, you see the post today or yesterday was about accepting hadiths from good people. Good people, that's between you and Allah, right? The only interesting thing I'm interested in when taking a hadith from you is, are you good enough not to lie about the Prophet ﷺ, right? Which is quite a low level of morality. Okay. So you don't have to be that amazing. So I'm interested in you being, you demonstrate the moral ability not to lie about the Prophet ﷺ. That's number one. But way more important than all of that is how reliable you are. So in a hadith, they will stipulate two things. You are upright and you are accurate. It is extremely rare that somebody is criticized for their morality, right? You're not going to go into a bar and try and find a hadith from somebody. So it is the level of religiosity to be accepted in a hadith is not that much. Like you just have to be a good person. But to be accepted in a hadith for being reliable and accurate is very high, and it's very difficult to be accepted because most people, as humans, make mistakes. So therefore, assuming the worst, when the chain of transmission says "Rajulun min Bani Damra," right, which says Zayd ibn Aslam narrated us from a man from Bani Damra, what's the question we're going to ask?
Is he liable and
Is he reliable? I have no idea who he is,
right?
right? So here I was going to say a man, right? Like, well, what kind of man? I don't know who he is. So the default of a hadith like this is hadith is going to be weak, right? So when the chain is Malik, yes, we trust him, we rely on him. Zayd ibn Aslam, yes, we trust him, we rely on him, very accurate. From a man, I don't know who that man is, so therefore I'm going to assume he makes mistakes in hadiths. That's the assumption I'm going to make, right? Because the default is we are critical and not, I wouldn't say cynical, but we assume the worst because, right, that's how we work. We don't say, oh, I'm sure he had a good intention. It's not, we're not interested in that, right? That's not interesting. Hence the quote that we get shared on Instagram from Ibn Manda. He says, when you see, oh, the chain transmission says so and so who used to worship Allah. I really don't care how much tahajjud you pray. That's between you and Allah. That's not relevant to knowledge, right? Knowledge is, are you religious enough to carry this responsibility? Are you actually accurate, right? In fiqh, the same thing. You might be a religious person. That doesn't make you a faqih. You might be a religious person. Doesn't make you good at tajweed, right? You might not have the intellect needed to do it. That's nothing to do with how good or bad you are in the sight of Allah. But that's the function that I'm using you for. So here when you say a man from the tribe of Damra, we don't know who he is, therefore it's not going to be reliable. He's assumed to be unreliable. From his father, I don't know who his father is either, right? So this is how the Bible is narrated, right? The Bible is like this. Well, they must have been good people, of course, right? They must have had good intentions. We assume they had good intentions, and that's enough. That's how the Bible is preserved. That's not how the Quran and Hadith have been preserved. Quran and Hadith have been preserved with cutthroat accuracy, meaning if you're not amazing, you're not, I'll put you to the side. Okay, go ahead, Mahed.
Um, I was wondering, like, like for instance, usually we Muslims try to not reveal someone else's like bad sides or something like that. But when it comes to hadith, like I sometimes hear that, oh, that man was a liar, don't listen to him, or that man did that crime, so we cannot take hadith from him. I'm saying, like, doesn't this create like divisions and goes against?
Yeah, so some of the early scholars they were confused about those issues and they took exception to that. Like, why are you doing that? Like that's haram. But then the issue is it's a communal obligation. So it's a communal obligation. You have to do this. So, you know, so so, so there's
Yes.
there's your right as an individual, that's fine. But then there's someone else made a mistake. What can we do? So let's take that practical thing. Did Sayyidina Umar make certain mistakes in hadith? Yes, he did. And we pointed them out. Did Abu Hurairah, did other people? Yeah. And so it is not considered riba, or it's considered riba that is halal lid-darura because of duress. Like we have to do that, right? So if there was, let's say, for example, um, there's no way to protect people from harm without making it public, then that's what you have to do, make it public. So people are buying petrol from a petrol station or from a company, and it's dangerous. It can actually, the car could blow up or could damage their vehicles. You tell them if you can tell each individual don't do it, then that's what you should do. You should tell them you should buy from somewhere else. That's fine, right? But now you have a problem. It's like I can't tell a million people independently, so then you have to make it public, right? There we go. So now you've exposed someone's faults, but you have to make it public. What else are you supposed to do?
Okay.
Or there's a scholar, for example, a scholar, and he makes a lot of mistakes, right?
Hmm.
Makes a lot of mistakes. Brother, I know you're teaching fiqh, for example, but I've seen you made a mistake here, 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 here. Please stop. And then he doesn't stop. Someone else speaks to him, brother, please stop. Like this, there's mistakes. It doesn't stop. And then you have to do it publicly and say, listen, public statement by somebody who's revered by people. Do not listen to Sheikh so and so. He makes lots of mistakes. Here are his mistakes. Don't listen to him. Right? Some sheikh going around, and again, this kind of thing happens. Some sheikh going around having secret marriages, right? Wherever he goes, he gives a talk somewhere, meets some lady, whatever it is, has a secret marriage with her, and everywhere he goes, he has a secret marriage and does not give him their rights, and you've spoken to him and but it's like it doesn't stop, right? It doesn't stop. So what are you supposed to do now? Just let the harm continue? right? So the default is this private. That's what happened between, so and two people, and that's it. And he made a mistake and he made trouble. That's it. The default is, you cover people's faults and let them correct themselves, and that's it. But when it's widespread and it's just happening again and again and again, you have to expose people, but only to the extent that you have to do it. So if you could expose it to a group, you'd expose it to a group. If you can blackmail him, say, listen, I am gonna have this person give a public statement about you unless you stop. And he says, okay, I'll stop. And then he stopped and it's clear, right? So only to the extent needed, right?
Okay. Uh, but like, let's say someone is engaged in some sin that he can't control, like he falls into it, and then I think still they don't take the hadith from him, right? Like for instance, Imam
But
Bukhari, he once saw someone like
yeah, so
pulling the donkey.
yeah, but that is an anecdote. So this is a key thing that I want to move away from, right? Which is, oh, we follow Imam Abu Hanifa because he prays tahajjud. Or and it's like, I mean, yeah, obviously we want to follow religious people, but that is not how we function. Like the way that they think that, or that many people think we function is very emotive and it's based on inspiration. That's not how the deen, meaning that's not how that's not how it works, right? That we don't follow Imam Abu Hanifa because he prayed a lot of tahajjud, right? Or oh, he so and so didn't rate from so and so only because he saw him mistreat, trick a horse. Like that's a story that we've heard and that's relevant, but that's not the meat of it. The meat of it is actual research, meaning I have narrated from thousands and thousands of people. I have all this data and who's narrating from who, and I see that your track record is you make significant errors, and I've seen it here, 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 and you've made too many mistakes. If now you narrate a hadith, I'm going to assume that it's a mistake because you've made so many mistakes in the past. That is the actual how it works. It is not a religious process. It is an academic process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
Like,
That is for
or
the
tajweed.
accuracy part.
Like tajweed, mashallah, my tajweed teacher, whenever he'd recite the surah, he would cry. That's fantastic. May Allah reward him. Inshallah, he's going to be in Firdaus al-A'la. But is he a good tajweed teacher? No, because he cannot pronounce the qaf. Whereas his clean-shaven friend, who is seldom seen in the masjid, can actually pronounce the qaf properly and does actually know the details, right? And so the point is, it's not based on how religious you are. That's because if that were the case, that's like we're like the Christians, like, oh, but they had a good intention. Yeah, but like your creed doesn't make any sense. There's no logic in it. Oh, but the people who write it, they were divinely protected. How do you even know that? Right? Oh, he wouldn't have lied. I know. He doesn't lie, but he make mistakes. So the academic critical side of things is very, very much present, right? It's very much present. So we have to understand that the deen has been protected through ilm, through objective, critical thinking, not just good people with good intentions. Does that make sense? So here,
Yeah,
like, do you honestly think that this person is a liar or a drunk? And, why you could ask the question, why would he narrate a hadith if it wasn't reliable? I don't know, because he relied on it, right? So Zayd ibn Aslam told this hadith to Malik and didn't mention who the person was and didn't mention who his father was because he trusted him. Okay, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Zayd ibn Aslam, you trust the hadith. I don't trust the hadith, right? So it's like business, right? So the hadith critics, they're called nuqad, they're called the critics, right? Naqd is not a nice word. Right? It's like a criticism, right? It's a harsh word because you have to be a bit of a pain in the neck for things to be done, right? If you work with a manager who is just nice, right? A manager cannot be just nice. Nice doesn't cut it as a manager because sometimes you have to be cruel. Sometimes you have to be skilled. Sometimes you have to have, right? Like the president, he's a nice guy. Let's vote for the nicest person. That's not you can't be a ruler just by being nice. Oh, my surgeon is really nice. I don't really care how nice he is, as long as he's nice enough to do the job properly. I'm more interested in how many successes he's had with this kind of surgery, which is very difficult. Does that make sense?
So if someone is like very correct, like he doesn't make mistakes, but he's a sinner, that's fine. Like to take hadith from them.
No. So somebody who is somebody who's a sinner, meaning he's persisting in sin. So the issue that basically doesn't happen. Like you don't find it when you're seeing that what they were dealing with, the reality what they're dealing with is they weren't like sinners weren't narrating hadiths, basically. It's not a thing that you do. So I remember like one scenario where somebody was criticizing one hadith narrator and he said he doesn't pray properly, right? And so he didn't accept hadith from him. But it's not the default. The default is basically I'm interested in are you good enough to narrate a hadith from, which is quite a low level, right? Like, how accurate are you? Will you change facts? Will you actually lie? And now some people will lie, right? And so why would they lie? And again, it's because they're religious. Um, and so they'll lie for two reasons. They lie because they really see that the crowd need that kind of message. So they will make a message up that will move the crowd, and everybody will be so moved to tears by this hadith that is not a hadith, right? So they will change the message of Islam to move their followers, right? So that's one thing, which is obviously a huge sin and very, very bad. But they are, it's their religiosity, the fact that they are religious and they care about the religion that made them do it, but it is misplaced. That's A. And then there's B, which is the showbiz. So, for example, suddenly Mahir is also teaching this book. And Mahir has a chain of transmission for the Muwatta and I don't. So then I will make up a chain transmission, right? And so they will make up hadiths to wow people because it will be because there's so much prestige in being religious, right? We have to think of a time where religious people were revered. You are the stars of the world, right? And so there's a lot of showbiz in being the Grand Mufti. There's a lot of showbiz in being the hadith scholar, the teacher, right? And so it's a big issue. And so they'll create hadiths in order to just be the number one hadith scholar, not number two, right? Which is obviously haram and sinful, but it's just that's showbiz, right? That's what happens. That's what happens to people when the limelight gets to you and it's just too much. Like the whole of Central Asia is talking about you, and you don't know the hadith. One of my teachers was told this. He said, he was going to do live fatwa on TV. Okay. One of his teachers said, absolutely not. He says, why? He says, because you are going to be put on the spot. And at that moment, when you are live on TV, you're going to say something and it's going to be incorrect. Don't do it. It's great to be that person. Bang, we ask him every single question, and every single question has an answer. It's pretty embarrassing to say, I don't know in front of 10 million people, isn't it? Right? So showbiz got to people. There are scenarios of that happening, and the wow factor, like I need to know a hadith and these kind of things that happens, and then lying about hadiths in order to encourage people, right? So that was Nuh ibn Abi Maryam. Um, he said, he narrates hadiths from the student of Ibn Abbas, right? He said from Ikrimah, the student of Ibn Abbas, to the Ibn Abbas, he has a hadith for every single surah of the Quran, a quote about how the benefit of reciting this thing for every single verse of the Quran, every single surah of the Quran, right? And so he was asked, why did you make up these hadith? He said, I saw people, nobody's reading the Quran. Everybody's reading seerah, they're doing fiqh, they're not doing Quran. I wanted to do Quran, so I made up these hadiths, right? And so things like that happen, right? Things like that happen. So the point is, we assume worst case scenario. I'm assuming that this person makes mistakes, and I'm assuming that this is one of his mistakes, therefore the hadith is weak, right? And I'm assuming his father as well is makes mistakes in hadith, and I'm assuming that he made a mistake here, so I'm going to label this hadith as we see it, right? As weak. It's a bit like medication, right? Like the way we deal with medication is very, very careful, right? Where is the label? Where is it this? Where is it that? Where is it this? Any single problem, we're just going to throw it away, right? Can you return if you went walked into a pharmacist, right? You go into the pharmacy, you buy something, and you walk out and walk in again. Can you return it? No. Why? What did I do? Urinate on it? I didn't even open it. Didn't even open it. Why can't I return it? We're gonna just because, like just because of the nature of the way we work with healthcare and these things, we're gonna be careful. That's all. Right? You cannot return medication, period. End of story. Right? So we're dealing with the words of the Messenger of Allah, right? Every hadith is part of Allah's message to me. So therefore I'm going to be super, super careful, right? I'm not saying that it is actually wrong, but I'm saying I don't know that it's right, or I don't have reasonable evidence to say that it's right because I don't know what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? So it's really important to have that cutthroat, mentality in our minds. That's very important. It's like, oh, that's how our deen has been preserved. It has not been preserved, you know, by religious people, good intended people. It's been preserved by people who are religious but thorough and cutthroat and very, very smart. And it's survival of the fittest of who is this, who, and so that's how our deen has been. That's the example of a deen that is preserved. And what is an example of a deen that has not been preserved? Look at Judaism, look at Islam, look at Christianity, look at some other religion. It's just good people with good intentions, right? So today you can find a rabbi, he will have a chain of transmission back to Moses, alayhi salam, for the Torah. He has. But none of those names will mean anything. Like there's this, I'm Hare Krishna, same thing. I think back to Krishna or something like that. Something crazy. Like they have a chain transmission, but it doesn't mean anything, right? In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they'll have a chain transmission, right? I've seen a teacher. He had his sanad. He had his chain of transmission on the wall, and it's like very meaningful. And I've seen it in place. I was trying to get my I was trying to get somebody to teach me Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he says I don't have ijaza. Like an ijaza is a big thing. Like it's not a joke. And the kind of person who is teaching me, he's very, very careful of how he narrates this art, right? So you see so and so narrates from so and so, like, oh man, like how did you beget whatever black belt, whatever it's called in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from so and so? That must mean you're really good, right? As opposed to, oh, you have a PhD from that university, or how much did it cost? $10? You know? And it's like, and how did that university even become a university? Well, they paid the cousin of the prime minister. Fantastic, right? So you have a PhD from some random country that means nothing. It actually means nothing, right? And so this process of verification it's very profound. Chain of transmission
So,
is so important in Islam that they'll even make up a chain transmission for a story because a story wouldn't sound like a story without a chain transmission. So you'll have a piece of literature. It's known to literature. This is not even real, but the story will begin. So and so narrates because it just wouldn't even sound even like when you read a story, you have to play a game. Like let's imagine it's real for a little bit. They couldn't even imagine it to be real without a chain transmission. So they'll say haddathani so and so. Like every single thing is has a chain transmission. Poetry has a chain transmission. Words in Arabic language has a chain transmission. Everything has a chain transmission.
like, what do you think about like there are like many scholars over the recent years, like they have written books and sometimes those books contain Maudu hadith. So what do you think about like does that render that scholar like we don't know whether he did it intentionally or not. So does that make all
Yes.
of his work like
Oh,
unusable?
no, it doesn't. So Sheikh Albani said that about Sheikh Kishk, for example. Sheikh Kishk, for example, famous preacher in Egypt. He said call him Hatibul Layl, like he just quotes on his khutbahs, he quotes all sorts of hadith. It means that he's not reliable in terms of the accuracy of the hadith. Is he a bad person? No, he's not a bad person. You find that person inspiring, okay, fine, but that's about it. So it means so when you say when you say that scholar is unreliable for what? Like, are you asking him to inspire you? Are you asking for this or something else? That varies, right? So
Like, should we be reading their books anymore if we find Maudu
what you need to
Hadith
know
in
is
one of?
you need to know how that person works. So Ihya Ulumuddin, Imam Ghazali, right? Imam Ghazali in his Qanun al-Ta'wil, he says, بضاعتي في الحديث مزجاة. He says, I don't know much about hadith. I'm not a muhaddith, right? So that's not my world. My world is not hadith. And so in the Ihya Ulumuddin, there's hadiths that are A, not hadiths, B, weak hadiths, and I think perhaps some fabricated hadiths, right? Al-Hafidh al-Iraqi, he went through the hadiths in the Ihya Ulumuddin by Imam Ghazali, and he said, he will say very humbly, right, in a very humble and gentle way, Lam ajidhu, I couldn't find that hadith, right? What does it mean if Hafid al-Iraqi couldn't find the hadith? It means it's not a hadith, right? It means Imam Ghazali quoted some source, we don't know what they are, which quoted some other source that we don't know which are, of a hadith, and they made a mistake, right? And that's all, right? So now Ihya al-Ulumuddin is suddenly invalid? Absolutely not. So Ihya al-Ulumuddin as a source of hadith is invalid, right? You're quoting a hadith and the source you gave is Ihya al-Ulumuddin. That's not a source for hadith. But Ihya al-Ulumuddin um, is one of the sources, is a source in Shafi fiqh. It is used here and there, but it is a major source for tasawwuf, right? So if you look at Minhaj al-Qasidin, later Hanbali scholars, using building like everybody has built an Imam Ghazali. Everybody reveres Ihya Ulumuddin, right? Everybody, but it's just the aspect as a hadith source is not that useful, right?
Okay,
So it's not the scholar is off; it's that this thing is off in that scholar. What if a scholar says something? What if, for example, I'm speaking and my Arabic is off, but the statement that I made is true? So you say, yeah, Farid is a source of Arabic. He's not Arab, and his Arabic is a bit all over the place. So therefore, it's not. But then what if the statement I'm saying is correct? Just because my Arabic is funny doesn't make what I'm saying wrong. It just means you can't take Arabic from me. Does that make sense?
but like, doesn't this create a problem? Like, let's say I learn this hadith and I am not a scholar, and then I teach it to someone else, then they teach it to someone else, and then
Exactly.
it
That's why you
spreads.
have to have chain transmission so that I know what's going on. So you
But as a
quote
layman, I cannot tell in this book which is a Maudu hadith
Yeah,
and
so
which is a
for
good one.
example, you write a book, okay? In that book, it says, here's a hadith, and you quote the source. So if you don't quote the source, I'm saying, well, where's the hadith from? And if you do quote the source and you write Ihya al-Ulumuddin, I'm like, oh, okay. I know what is the relative worth of that, right? So that's why whenever you quote a hadith, you should always quote a source. So that, and now I know
Okay.
how to deal with it. Otherwise, I don't know,
Oh,
you know what I'm
okay,
saying?
okay. I see. Yes, yes, I understand.
Right? So I so
Uh,
I'm gonna so you I see you, for example, you go into a pharmacist and you're gonna go in and buy something that you don't have a prescription for. Okay?
yeah.
You need it, and I know you need it, but you don't have a prescription for it. So
Hmm.
either you can't get it because you don't have a prescription for it, or B, it's too expensive. Okay? Then I say, hey, what's your problem? And I say, listen, I pull you to the side, I say, listen, my friend's a doctor. He's willing to give you a prescription. Now that's illegal, right?
Yeah.
That's illegal. Like you're not his patient. You have to go but he'll give you the prescription for it. Or I have the same problem as you. We both have the same issue with migraines. I say, yeah, here, I have extra, take this. Right? But at least you know my source and you know it's not 100% because if it's done properly, you go to a doctor, you go through the full check, the doctor finds out what your problems are, the new situation, and then you get your own prescription, right? So I went through a different route with you. I gave you a prescription drug from a doctor who's not that's not he's not your doctor. Or I gave you one of my things for migraines, even though I don't even know all your medical history, which is not a good way of doing medicine. But at least you know what my source is. I say, listen, I've been given this. Do you have this problem, that problem? You're like, no, okay, it should be okay for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a
Like when
weak
you,
chain of transmission, but I expose the weakness to you. So in Arabic,
yeah,
من أسند إليك فقد أحد إليك. Whoever gives you their source and the source of their source and the source of their source, i.e. their chain of transmission, I'm quoting this book. They've made you responsible. right? Here's a hadith. It's in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Like, okay, the hadith is in this some encyclopedia. So somebody who has no clue would not find it funny. You would find it funny. It's like, how is that a source for a hadith? Like, why am I
Mm.
referring to a? And so at least I gave you my source, right? I said, as the Prophet ﷺ said, quoting, here's an encyclopedia. There we go.
Mm.
Right? And people will do that, right? They'll give you the source. For example, I will quote a hadith. I'll give you an example. I'll quote a hadith and I will say Shu'ab al-Iman by Imam al-Bayhaqi. A hadith scholar would know the following. This hadith, if it's only found in Shu'ab al-Iman, and Imam al-Bayhaqi is in the 5th century, the chances of a hadith only being narrated by one person in a hadith in the 5th century is basically slim to none, A. B. Imam al-Bayhaqi in Shu'ab al-Iman will quote weak hadiths all the time because he's not interested in Sahih hadiths only. So therefore, what Farid is saying when he says, here's the hadith, quote Shu'ab al-Iman, is the hadith is probably weak. So I already know what's going on, right? Or if you say, it is halal according to all 4 schools um, to drink wine at your friend's birthday party if he'll be upset otherwise. And then quote Trump, why I became Muslim in 2025. So you look at the book, and when I told you, you know, President Trump wrote a book on why he became Muslim in 2025, you wouldn't trust it, would you? But at least it gave you my source. So there we go. There's a fatwa. Here's a source for the fatwa. And if you want to trust Trump, then go ahead. Right? So the point is sources. Now, where does religion fall apart when you don't know the sources? So Muhammad ibn Sirin, he said this. He said, "Why are you riding horses without saddles? Like, why are you quoting hadith with no reference?" So again, that is exactly the Bible. I don't know who Matthew is, and he was 100 to 200 years after Jesus. I have no idea who Matthew is, how reliable he is, how accurate he is, and who his sources are. So it's all just faith. It's just like, yeah, I read the Bible, it changed my life, and so it must be true. That's not how the deen works. That's not how it works, right? I read a hadith. Somebody told me this once. They said a hadith is sahih if it makes sense. That is not true at all. Because that means the Prophet ﷺ said pi, what's it called? R equals, E equals MC squared. E equals MC squared makes sense. That doesn't make it a hadith, does it? Right? So, and maybe the Prophet ﷺ might say something that doesn't make sense to you. It's okay. So the whole thing about sources, is Imam Malik a religious person? That's great. I'm not interested in how, it's nice to read about him. Zayd ibn Aslam, an amazing person. That's nice. But that isn't the prime thing that we're dealing with. It is not how religious they were or why they had good intentions. That's not what we're interested in. Does Imam Malik have a good track record? Does he make mistakes? Does Zayd ibn Aslam make mistakes? Does so and so make a mistake? Here is just an invalid research because I don't even know who he is. How could I even begin to find out how many mistakes he made or didn't make? So I don't even know what's going on, right? This is medication from a doctor in Central Asia. Who is the doctor in Central Asia? I mean, you're going to take that medication? No. I don't know who he is. Now, I might have a good opinion, say, well, inshallah, it's okay, right? But um and I might find this same hadith narrated by somebody else, alhamdulillah, right? Somebody might narrate the hadith, somebody else narrates it from Malik, and Imam Malik mentioned the man's name. And now I can research who is that man? Did he exist in history? Was he known? Does he have a track record of narrating hadith? Is it a good track record, etc.? And I can find his father. I might find that. But if I don't, the default of a hadith like this is that it is weak. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Everybody else who's following? Muhammad, Adib, Sister Tigist?
Yes, Ustad, but on a personal basis, is it okay if I just believe that since Imam Malik has narrated this or has recorded this, it should be good.
Yes,
But I just
that is so. Yeah, that is true. So now you come along and you say, well, so in principle, the hadith is weak. Okay, but Suyuti and others they say there are no weak hadiths in the Muwatta, period. Right? And Imam Malik is very strict. So that's something else. But that is not the default methodology that we're talking about. That default methodology says, I trust Malik, the hadith narrated by Malik, khalas. But that is not critical and that does not reflect the methodology in general. Does that make sense?
yes, yes.
And I'll give you a very important example of that. Um, Imam Malik, he narrates with his chain of transmission um, that the Prophet ﷺ wrote a letter to a Sahabi. Okay, a Sahabi that we know. Now, that Sahabi, the story of that Sahabi is known. That the Prophet ﷺ wrote him a letter is known. So there's no issue about that. Imam Malik's teacher, Az-Zuhri, actually saw that letter. He said, I saw the descendants of that Sahabi and I saw the letter that the Prophet ﷺ wrote. Okay, so there's no question about whether or not he wrote the letter. The issue is, though, the content of that letter. So in that letter, it states that nobody should recite the Quran except somebody who is pure. Right? So the question is, I know the Prophet ﷺ wrote that letter, just like I know the Prophet ﷺ recited the Quran. But I need to know the specifics. I need to know who heard so and so say that so and so said that the Prophet ﷺ said these words and these words and these words. So I know that the letter was written. I just don't know about the content. And I have a broken chain for the content, or at least that part of the content. So Ibn Abdul Barr, the great Andalusian scholar, he went through the Muwatta. He has two commentaries on the Muwatta, right? And he says about this point. He says the letter is so wide known historically, right, that it doesn't need a chain transmission. That's like saying that was the Prophet ﷺ born in Mecca? Yes. Okay, where's your chain transmission? We all know that. That's just so widespread. Okay. So here's the problem then. That's like saying Sahih Bukhari is so well known, I don't need evidence that this hadith is inside Bukhari. Yes, you do. Because otherwise, somebody could come along, reprint Bukhari, adds a hadith to it, and say, well, Bukhari is so well known, you can't question it. Right? And that's how things would change. So we have to be critical. We have to say, I know that the letter was written. I know that the letter was written from the Prophet ﷺ to this Sahabi. But I'm talking about the content. I want to know specifically, do we have a sound chain transmission that the Prophet ﷺ said those words? Right? And the answer is no. Okay? And so that's a problem, right? So we have to be, and because why do we have to be thorough? Because problems do happen, right? In money, do we have to be careful with money? Or do you just like have a good intention? You have to say, so did you give the money to so and so? Yeah. What was his name? Yeah. Did he have ID? It's like, no. Okay, that's not him. And even with good intention, problems happen with money. So the same thing with information, right? What's the game telephone? You call it in America, right? We call it Chinese whispers in England, right? Um, Even if people are not trying to make a mistake, mistakes will happen, right? Let alone if they're trying to make a mistake, right? And so this is the nature of humans, is that things will make mistake, and even AI will do this, right? AI will do this. The other day I looked up a hadith and AI said, the AI on Google, whatever it's called, and it said, oh, this hadith is so in this place, and it's not. And so AI they weren't trying to change anything. It wasn't a kind of a program to change Islam. It's just made a mistake. It happens, right? So being thorough is very important. Our deen has been defended and protected and preserved by cutthroat thoroughness. That's the key thing to understand. Everything has there's enough material in every single thing to question it. I'm not trying to say that it's questionable, meaning it's doubtful. I'm saying there is actually information. You have no ability to even question the Bible because we don't have any information to question. We don't even know where it comes from. Whereas the Quran, the Hadith, every single thing is exposed for you. You can just, let's say, what's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? The embarrassing, awkward things are there as well. The inaccuracies or the anomalies, the mistakes of hadith narrators, hadith that sound weird, hadith that everything is there for you to access. Right? We don't believe Bukhari because Bukhari is to pray tahajjud. We believe Bukhari because he's thorough. And also we know where he made mistakes, where he didn't make mistakes. Right? So it's
How do we know that last part, like where he made mistakes? How does, like, let's say like one person narrates a whole bunch of hadiths, but one hadith he makes a mistake on. How does one track that? I think you're muted.
okay, go ahead, Mahar, sorry, say it again.
I meant like, let you said that we know the mistakes that Imam Bukhari made.
Yeah.
So how, like, we know he's very thorough. Then how do you figure out whether he made that mistake or not? Like, how does that work?
Because what happens is he's not living in a bubble. Imam Bukhari is not living in an island in the middle of nowhere with teachers we've never heard of. All of his teachers are the teachers of other scholars. All of his sources have other sources collecting from them. So every single hadith in Bukhari we can find somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So
So,
so I sent you to Mars, Jupiter, and somewhere else, and Pluto. Okay, it's not a planet anymore, right? It's a moon. And I said, take pictures. You came back with pictures of planet Earth. How did I know that? Because I sent Adib, Muhammad, and Sister Tigris as well to the same places. So now I've tested you, right? What do you do within a factory? You test the factory. Make a bottle. Okay, make another bottle. Make another bottle. Make another. Okay, they're all the same bottles. Okay, good. Right? You trust the machine because you've tried and tested it. So Imam Bukhari does not narrate hadith that no one else narrates. Right? Imam Tirmidhi doesn't do that. Their teachers and their teachers. There's this huge movement of quoting and narrating hadiths throughout the whole of the Muslim world. And so whenever you say anything, there's 10 other people who either agree or disagree with you. Does that make sense? As opposed to a man from the tribe of Damra. I don't know who the tribe of Damra. I don't even know where that is. Right? I have no idea who you are, and I have no one else I can't reference this against anybody. So therefore, it's just hearsay now. That's what it is, right? In England, we call it "me mate Dave," right? Have you heard that before? In England, like, oh, my mate Dave said this, right? It's like, who's your friend Dave? Like, I don't know who he is, and what's the worth of that statement, right? And he's a religious person. That's fantastic, right? So it is precisely religious people or excessively religious people that make mistakes in reality. So it is, yes, there's liars, but it's like good people who work in a non-thorough way. So I want you to be thorough because that's our deen is, and once one of my teachers, he was telling us, he said he was researching one hadith narrator for 3 days, like night and day, for 3 days, trying to find out who is this hadith narrator and is he reliable. So at the end of it, he asked one of his teachers and he said, Sheikh, like at the end of the day, the hadith that's being narrated is like a non-hadith, like it doesn't even say anything. Like there's so many hadiths that really don't add anything. Like it's like, okay, I kind of knew that, or that's not new, right? There's a lot of repetition, okay, or not super, super important. So like at the end of the day, like what was the point? I spent 3 days narrating, finding about this hadith narrator. It really doesn't change much. What am I doing? What is my niyyah? And so the sheikh told him and said, this is tathbeet ad-din fi qulub al-muslimin. You are making Muslims know with certainty that their deen is a real deen that they should follow and is not a joke. Because I can't do that with Matthew. oh, who, like, you go and research Matthew, we don't really know who these people are, and it's just, and they will speak in very certain terms. Oh, he was this. They don't know who he is, and they don't know what he did, and they don't know who his sources are, and they don't know what's going on at all. They don't know what's going on, and there's no way to even start finding out what's going on. You can just hype, Whereas in Islam, every single thing is questionable. I don't believe Imam Malik. Go ahead, knock yourself out. Let's go. Let's go and question Imam Malik. Let's question his teacher. Did Zayd ibn Aslam even exist? Right? You can ask questions like that, and then you can prove that he did exist. Is he reliable? Imam Malik keeps quoting Zuhri. Wasn't Zuhri involved in the Umayyads? Weren't they like a political party? Weren't they this? Weren't they that? You can question everything. Everything is questionable. But there's actually material for you to question, and you can see whether it's right or wrong, as opposed to any other religion. You can't do that. You don't even know where it goes from. So I have more certainty about hadith than I have about Shakespeare, even though Shakespeare was 500 years ago, because I don't have any sources for Shakespeare. I don't know people around Shakespeare saying Shakespeare actually wrote these poems or wrote these plays. We just know that he existed, and we just know that it's ascribed to him. That's all. So when we look at hadith, it's actually a mu'jiza. It's like a miracle. The whole system of hadith criticism is one of the many miracles of Islam that says this is my last message to mankind, and it's reliable. Or at least critiquable. You can at least critique the hadith, right? Whereas something's not even critiquable. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So let's quickly read this hadith then. He says, Imam Malik informed us from Zayd ibn Aslam, narrated to us from a man from Bani Lama, from his father. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about aqiqah, and he answered, I do not like disobedience. Uquq al-walidain is being rude to your parents. As if he did not like the name. He said, whoever has a child born to him and wants to sacrifice for his child, then let him do so. Go ahead. Right? And so, and then he mentions أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا نافع عن عبد الله بن عمر أنه لم يكن يسأله أحد عن أهله من أهله عقيقة إلا أعطاه إياه وكان يئق عن ولده بشاة وعن الذكر والأنثى. Right, so Malik informed us. So Malik is saying, there's the hadith. So what's Imam Malik's process? Imam Malik's process is slightly different. He's saying, whether the hadith is sahih or not according to your criterion that you just spoke about, I'm interested in what did the early Muslims of Medina do. So he's quoting the hadith, and then he's going to say, what did Abdullah ibn Umar do? Totally different criterion, right? Which could be right and could be wrong. Okay? Because what if the hadith is weak, meaning I don't even know if the Prophet said it, and then some early Muslims followed it. Maybe they were right, maybe they were wrong. For Imam Malik, that's very important what they did in Medina. For Imam Malik, that's a proof of what should be done. But you could critique that as well. You say, well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe Nafi's not right. So he said, maybe Ibn Umar is not right. And that's very important because a Sahabi is not a prophet, right? He could make mistakes. So Malik informed us from Nafi informed us concerning Abdullah ibn Umar that if any of his family used to ask him for aqiqah, he would give it to him. He would give a ewe, meaning, so it's not necessarily a ewe. So shah, what is shah, right? Shah means a ewe or a nanny, right? A female goat, right? Or a goat. He would give, and it could even be male as well in reality. So it could be a sheep or a goat, that's what it means. It doesn't specifically have to be a ewe. So shad doesn't, that's not a literal, that's not a fantastic translation. Whether it was male, i.e. the child was male or the child was female. وأخبرنا أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا جعفر بن محمد بن علي. So this is Ja'far as-Sadiq. This is the 6th or 4th Imam for the Shia, right? So Imam Malik studied with him, right? So he was made into an Imam but he's one of the great fuqaha, right? Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali, right? So Ja'far, the son of Muhammad, the son of Ali, the son of Hussein, the son of Ali, if I remember correctly, right? But he's one of the Shia, for the Shia, he's one of the Imams. عن أبيه أنه قال وزنت فاطمة بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شعر حسن وحسين رضي الله عنهما وزينت وزينب وأم كلثوم فتصدقت بوزن ذلك فضة. It says فضة, but it's فضة. So it says Malik informed us from Ja'far ibn Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hassan ibn Ali, if I believe correctly, that his father said Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Messenger of Allah, weighed the hair of Hassan and Hussein when they were born, and that of Zainab and Kulthum, their sisters, and gave the weight of that in silver as sadaqah, right? So this is the sunnah of giving the weight of the hair, giving the weight in silver of the weight of the hair of the child when they're born. أخبرنا مالك أخبرني ربيعة بن عبد الرحمن عن محمد بن علي بن حسين أنه قال وزنت فاطمة بنت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شعر حسين وحسن وحسين فتصدقت بوزنه فضة. And the same thing had here. Rabi'a ibn Abdul Rahman informed me that Muhammad ibn Ali ibn Hussein said Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, weighed the hair of Hassan and Hussein and gave its weight as sadaqah. قال محمد أما العقيقة فبلغنا أنها كانت في الجاهلية وقد فعلت في أول الإسلام ثم نسخ الأضحى كل ذبح كان قبله ونسخ صوم شهر رمضان كل صوم كان قبله ونسخ غسل الجنابة كل غسل كان قبله ونسخت الزكاة كل صدقة كان قبلها وكذلك بلغنا. So he has no chain transmission. Imam Muhammad is saying, said it has reached us, i.e. from the early Muslims and the Sahaba, etc., and the Prophet ﷺ. He says, as for aqiqah, slaughtering a sheep when a child is born, Imam Muhammad says, it has reached us that there was something done in the Jahiliyyah. They used to do that before Islam and the beginning of Islam. But then when Eid al-Adha was established, that you slaughter on Eid, which is wajib in the Hanafi school, right, that abrogated everything else. So that doesn't exist anymore, right? It's not a thing. Like aqiqah is not a thing anymore, according to Imam Muhammad. And fasting of Ramadan abrogated, for example, fasting on the 10th of Ashura, etc. You don't have to do that anymore. And similarly, the ghusl of sexual activity abrogates every ghusl that had to be done before that. So, for example, the Prophet ﷺ maybe originally said people have to do ghusl on Jummah, but now you just do ghusl for janaba and that's it. And similarly, zakah abrogated and took the place of every possibly obligatory charity before it, and that is what has reached us. He doesn't mention his sources, and he just says that in a general sense there, inshallah. So the point is, he's saying that his take on it is it's no longer a thing. Like you can do it if you want to, but it's no longer a thing, right? Like it's not obligatory, nor is it encouraged. It's just something you can do if you really want. It's not a big deal. But because the Eid al-Adha has taken its place. In the Shafi school, it is still recommended you slaughter 1 sheep for your daughter and 2 sheep for your son. Inshallah, we'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.